I never thought family greed could slice deeper than a knife. When our grandmother passed away, she left behind a collection of heirloom jewelry, pieces that carried generations of love, sacrifice, and stories. My sister always pretended to be the perfect, devoted granddaughter. So when she suddenly announced that Grandma had promised the jewelry to her alone, everyone believed her. I stayed silent at first, shocked and betrayed. Those pieces weren't just gold and gemstones. They were memories, milestones, and a part of my grandmother's legacy that belonged to both of us. But then, while cleaning out Grandma's old study, I stumbled upon something my sister never knew existed: an official appraisal receipt, signed, dated, and addressed. To me? From that moment, I knew the tables had turned. She had built her scheme on lies. But I had the one document that could shatter it all, and I was about to use it. My name is Courtney, and the jewelry in Grandma's antique chest wasn't just a collection of gold and gemstones. It was a living diary of our family's history. I still remember the way her eyes sparkled as she told me the story behind each piece. The sapphire ring she bought after her first paycheck. The pearl necklace she wore when she met Grandpa. The ruby brooch she saved for decades to buy. Every Sunday afternoon, she'd unlock that chest and let me hold them one by one, teaching me the stories that weren't written in any family photo album. She always said I had her heart and her eye for what truly mattered. "These aren't meant to sit in a safe," she once whispered. "They're meant to stay with someone who understands their worth." I believed her. I thought those words meant something unbreakable. So when she passed, a part of me clung to those memories as a final connection, a promise that some part of her would always remain. I had no idea those same heirlooms, once a symbol of love and continuity, would soon become the weapon my sister used to betray me. The day of Grandma's funeral was heavy with grief, but beneath the sorrow, something darker simmered. Relatives flew in from across the country, each with their own memories and motives. As we gathered in the old family home, polite smiles masked long-held resentments, and small conversations carried undertones of competition. My sister, radiant and composed, seemed to bask in the center of it all. She had always loved the spotlight, always wanted to be seen as the golden granddaughter. I tried to ignore the way she lingered near Grandma's jewelry chest, the way her fingers traced its carved wooden edges as though it already belonged to her. But when the will was read and Grandma's estate distributed, there was a conspicuous silence about the heirlooms. No mention, no instructions, just absence. It unsettled me, but I trusted that clarity would come. Instead, clarity would soon be replaced by something far more painful, a betrayal I never saw coming. A week later, my sister called a family discussion in the living room. She stood confidently before the jewelry chest, arms folded and tone rehearsed. "I wanted to clear the air," she began. "Grandma told me, personally, that all of this was meant for me." The words hit like a slap. My breath caught as relatives nodded, some offering congratulatory smiles. She spoke with such certainty, as if Grandma's promise was an undeniable fact. I tried to interject, to remind them of what Grandma had shared with me over the years. But my voice was drowned out by her self-assured declarations. She wanted them with someone who would cherish them, she added pointedly, glancing at me with a faint smirk. The implication was clear. In her eyes, I wasn't worthy. And somehow, everyone seemed to believe her. The following days felt like a waking nightmare. Whenever I tried to speak up, my words were brushed aside. "She must have told her in private," an aunt suggested. "Maybe Grandma changed her mind," another offered. Every attempt I made to share my memories, the conversations, the promises, was met with polite but firm disbelief. It was as though the bond I had shared with Grandma had been erased by a single confident lie. The family gathered around my sister, praising her maturity, her connection, her supposed closeness to Grandma. And me? I was reduced to a bitter, jealous outsider. The most painful part wasn't losing the jewelry. It was watching my grandmother's legacy twisted into something selfish and false, and realizing that no one cared to question it. I confronted my sister in private, hoping that reason might pierce the facade. "You know that's not what Grandma said," I whispered. "You know she meant for us to share them," she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a cold, triumphant one. "Oh, Courtney," she said, "you always misremember things. Grandma knew I'd appreciate them more. Maybe she didn't want to hurt your feelings by saying so." It was the perfect manipulation, painting me as confused, emotional, unreliable. She turned my truth into delusion and my memories into fabrications. Every conversation left me questioning myself, wondering if I had indeed imagined it all. And that's how gaslighting works. It doesn't just steal your reality, it makes you doubt you ever had one. Nights blurred together in a haze of anger and grief. I'd sit in Grandma's old armchair, clutching the framed photo of us from my graduation, trying to reconcile the woman who taught me about love and honesty with the family now tearing those values apart. I wasn't mourning the jewelry anymore. I was mourning the loss of trust, the death of something sacred between sisters. Betrayal had a way of making even the air feel heavier, and for the first time in my life, I felt powerless to protect what mattered most. I considered walking away, cutting ties, burying the pain. But deep down, a small, stubborn part of me whispered that this wasn't over. Not yet. It was during a rainy afternoon while sorting through boxes in Grandma's attic that fate intervened. Buried beneath old photo albums and letters, I found a small wooden chest I had never seen before. Inside was a collection of envelopes, handwritten notes, and one crisp document folded neatly in an envelope with my name on it. My heart pounded as I unfolded it. It was an official jewelry appraisal, signed by Grandma herself, listing every piece in her collection and naming me as the intended recipient. Tears blurred my vision, but beneath the emotion, a spark of something fierce ignited. My sister thought she had rewritten the story, but she had no idea the truth had been hiding here all along, and I was about to use it. Courtney sat at her kitchen table, the appraisal document spread before her like a map to buried truth. It was more than a list of gemstones and valuations. It was Grandma's voice, preserved in ink and signatures. Each page felt like a silent testimony, a promise that hadn't been erased by her sister's lies. She read and reread the lines, her heart pounding harder each time. There it was, in unmistakable language. Appraisal and ownership documentation prepared for my granddaughter, Courtney, for transfer upon my passing. It wasn't just sentiment, it was proof. Legally binding proof. And suddenly, the fog of doubt that had clouded her thoughts for weeks began to clear. This wasn't a matter of opinion or memory anymore. It was fact. Tears welled up as she traced Grandma's signature with her fingertip. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew she'd try something." And in that moment, grief transformed into determination. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The more she examined the appraisal, the more irrefutable it became. Not only did it list each piece of jewelry and its value, but it also included a clause explicitly stating that the collection was to remain in Courtney's possession as a continuation of family heritage. It was impossible to misunderstand. Her sister's story about a verbal promise collapsed under the weight of this written truth. Yet, Courtney knew evidence alone wasn't enough. Not in a family already convinced by charm and confidence over reality. She made copies of the document, tucking the original into a secure folder. With every line she read, her confidence grew. This wasn't a petty sibling argument anymore. It was a case of deception, one she now had the power to dismantle. And for the first time since Grandma's death, she felt like she wasn't fighting alone. Grandma had left her the ammunition she needed. Before she could act, Courtney needed to be certain, beyond any doubt, that the appraisal would hold up legally. She reached out to the jeweler listed on the document, a respected family-owned business Grandma had trusted for decades. The owner, an older gentleman with kind eyes, remembered Grandma instantly. "Oh yes, she was very specific about those pieces," he said. "She wanted everything documented in your name to avoid any confusion." The words hit Courtney like a jolt. Not only was the document authentic, but it had been part of Grandma's deliberate plan, a safeguard against exactly the situation unfolding now. When the jeweler offered to provide a notarized statement confirming the appraisal's authenticity, Courtney felt a surge of hope. Piece by piece, the narrative her sister had constructed was starting to crumble. And this time, Courtney wouldn't let it slip through her fingers. Later that week, over coffee with a distant aunt, another piece of the puzzle surfaced. As they spoke about Grandma's final months, the aunt casually mentioned, "You know, she told me more than once she wanted both of you to have something from her collection. Said it would keep you close even after she was gone." The words were gentle but powerful. They confirmed what Courtney had always believed, that Grandma's intention had never been to favor one over the other. And if her sister had truly known that, then her promise story wasn't just false. It was deliberate manipulation. Courtney thanked her aunt, careful not to reveal too much. The confirmation wasn't just comforting, it was strategic. Every piece of corroboration was another brick in the case she was building, another reason to believe that justice was still possible. The following weekend, Courtney's resolve hardened. Her sister began posting photos online, flaunting Grandma's jewelry at parties and brunches, captioning them with phrases like, "Family treasures always meant for me." The arrogance was infuriating. It wasn't just about the jewelry anymore. It was about erasing Courtney's place in their grandmother's story. Watching her sister wear those heirlooms as trophies of deceit lit a fire that had been smoldering for weeks. Each image, each smug post, was fuel. It reminded Courtney why she couldn't let this go. This wasn't about greed, it was about truth. About standing up for the love and promises that had been stolen from her. And this time, she had something far stronger than resentment. She had proof. With the appraisal, the jeweler's statement, and a growing collection of corroborating evidence, Courtney scheduled a meeting with an estate attorney. She laid everything out on the polished wooden table, the document, the emails, the photos, even the aunt's recollection. The lawyer studied the papers carefully, then looked up with a small, impressed smile. "You have a solid case," he said. "Legally, this appraisal is as binding as any clause in a will. If necessary, we can challenge any claims your sister makes, and win." The words lifted a weight off Courtney's chest. For the first time, this wasn't just about fighting for herself. It was about reclaiming a legacy that was rightfully hers. And the law, it seemed, was firmly on her side. As they wrapped up the meeting, the lawyer leaned back thoughtfully. "You mentioned your grandmother had a safe deposit box," he said. "It's possible she placed other documents there. Letters, revised instructions, maybe even a will supplement. If that's the case, it could make your position ironclad." The suggestion sent a chill down Courtney's spine. She had completely forgotten about the safe deposit box Grandma kept for important things. If there was more evidence in there, it could expose not just her sister's lies, but the full extent of Grandma's intentions. Courtney walked out of the office with renewed purpose. The path ahead was clear now. This wasn't the end of her search. It was only the beginning. And somewhere, locked away in that box, might be the final piece of the puzzle that would change everything. Courtney's heart raced as she stood beside the estate executor in the quiet, marble-walled vault room of the bank. The air was cool and sterile, yet her palms were damp with anticipation. The executor, a composed man with silver-rimmed glasses, slid a key into the heavy steel box and turned it with a soft click. Inside lay a small bundle of envelopes, tied neatly with a faded ribbon and a manila folder stamped with Grandma's familiar handwriting. Courtney's breath caught as she reached for them, almost trembling as if touching the documents would somehow bring her grandmother back. "This box was meant for you," the executor said gently. "She left explicit instructions that you should be notified when the time was right." Courtney's chest tightened. The time, it seemed, was now. With these contents in hand, she might finally have the proof needed to dismantle her sister's lies and restore the truth Grandma intended. Back home, Courtney carefully opened the envelopes on her kitchen table. Inside were handwritten letters addressed to her, messages filled with warmth, wisdom, and most importantly, clarity. Grandma had written explicitly about her wishes for the jewelry collection. It was to remain in Courtney's possession as a continuation of family legacy. The manila folder contained even more damning evidence, a draft of Grandma's will naming Courtney as the primary heir of the heirloom jewelry, along with additional appraisal receipts, all bearing official signatures. Every document was a nail in the coffin of her sister's fabricated story. Tears welled in Courtney's eyes as she read one particular line. "I trust you to protect these pieces, not just for their value, but for their meaning. They are yours." The weight of betrayal began to lift. Grandma had never wavered, and now Courtney had the proof to prove it. With the documents secured, Courtney and her lawyer dove into preparation mode. They meticulously compiled every piece of evidence: the original appraisal, the jeweler's notarized statement, Grandma's letters, the draft will, and testimony from relatives who had heard her wishes firsthand. The lawyer explained how each piece strengthened the legal argument. The receipts demonstrated intent. The draft will reinforced inheritance rights, and the letters painted a clear picture of Grandma's intentions. Even the social media posts her sister had made could now serve as evidence of knowingly false claims. What had started as a deeply personal betrayal was now transforming into an airtight legal case. Courtney wasn't just a grieving granddaughter anymore. She was the rightful heir with a mountain of proof behind her. And with each new document added to the file, her confidence grew. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Over the next 2 weeks, Courtney and her lawyer held a series of strategic meetings. They discussed every potential scenario, how her sister might react, the arguments she might try to make, and how to counter them with cold, undeniable facts. The plan was simple yet powerful. Present the evidence during the upcoming estate meeting, where the family and executor would be present. Reveal it piece by piece. First the appraisal, then the jeweler's statement, then the letters and draft will. By the time she was done, there would be no room for doubt, denial, or manipulation. Late at night, Courtney would rehearse what she'd say, her words sharp and deliberate. She wasn't just preparing for a confrontation. She was preparing to reclaim her grandmother's truth in front of everyone who had dismissed her. As the meeting date approached, subtle shifts began rippling through the family. Conversations grew tense. Side glances lingered longer than usual. It was clear something was coming, though no one knew exactly what. Courtney's sister, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface, remained smug and self-assured. She paraded around with Grandma's jewelry at family dinners, basking in admiration and sympathy. "I'm so glad Grandma trusted me with these," she would say, her tone dripping with false humility. Courtney bit her tongue, a calm mask hiding the fire beneath. Soon her sister's arrogance would collide headfirst with the truth, and when it did, the fallout would be devastating. For now, patience was her greatest weapon. The night before the estate meeting, Courtney sat alone in her living room, the folder of evidence resting on the coffee table. She traced Grandma's signature on the appraisal one last time, drawing strength from the woman who had loved and believed in her. She could have gone straight to court. She could have blindsided her sister with legal action. But she wanted this confrontation to be public, for everyone who had doubted her, dismissed her, and sided against her to see the truth with their own eyes. This wasn't just about reclaiming jewelry anymore. It was about reclaiming her voice, her dignity, and the bond that her sister had tried to erase. And tomorrow she would do exactly that. The morning of the estate meeting dawned bright and unnervingly calm. Courtney dressed deliberately, choosing Grandma's favorite color, a soft lavender blouse, as if to carry a piece of her into the battle ahead. When she arrived, the room buzzed with chatter. Relatives hugged her sister, showering her with compliments and sympathy, completely unaware that the narrative they'd embraced was about to shatter. At the head of the table, the executor shuffled papers, ready to begin. Her sister, adorned in Grandma's diamond necklace, caught Courtney's gaze and offered a smug, knowing smile. To her, this was already over. but Courtney knew better. Beneath the table, her hand rested on the folder of documents, the truth, the proof, the legacy. And as the meeting came to order, a single thought echoed in her mind. This ends today. The estate meeting began like a coronation. At the head of the long mahogany table, her sister basked in the attention of gathered relatives, smiling sweetly as if she were the center of the universe. The executor cleared his throat and began to review Grandma's estate, but she interrupted almost immediately, voice dripping with self-importance. "Grandma always said I was her favorite," she declared, clasping the diamond necklace around her throat for emphasis. "She knew I'd appreciate her jewelry more than anyone else, that I'd cherish it and pass it down properly." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Eyes turned toward Courtney, sympathetic, dismissive, even pitying. It was the same look they'd given her for weeks, the same unspoken judgment. Let it go. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she folded her hands neatly on the table and waited, letting her sister dig the hole deeper. "She told me personally it was all mine," her sister continued. "It's exactly what she wanted." The arrogance was breathtaking, and it was about to detonate in her face. When the boasting finally subsided, Courtney reached into her folder and placed a single document on the table. "I think Grandma might have told a slightly different story," she said calmly. The room stilled. Curious faces leaned closer as the executor adjusted his glasses and examined the paper. The original appraisal receipt, complete with Grandma's handwritten note at the bottom, "To be given to Courtney upon my passing." The silence was electric. A few relatives exchanged confused glances. One aunt gasped audibly. Her sister's confident smile faltered. "That doesn't mean anything," she stammered. "It's just paperwork. Paperwork with Grandma's handwriting," the executor corrected, his tone measured but firm, and clearly stating her intent. The power dynamic shifted instantly. The pity in the room evaporated, replaced by uncertainty, and a growing suspicion that the story they'd been fed wasn't the truth. Courtney wasn't finished. One by one, she laid out more documents. Grandma's letters, the draft will, the notarized statement from the jeweler, each piece layering evidence upon evidence. "This is Grandma's handwriting again," the executor confirmed as he read one letter aloud. "She explicitly names Courtney as the intended recipient of the jewelry collection." Courtney's sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Those are old drafts. Grandma changed her mind." "If she did," Courtney replied evenly, "then where's the updated version?" The question hung in the air unanswered. Her sister's silence spoke volumes. The relatives who once nodded along with her narrative now whispered among themselves, casting skeptical glances her way. The lies were unraveling, and Courtney hadn't even called in her witnesses yet. The executor invited the first witness into the room, the jeweler who had handled the appraisal. "I was personally instructed by your grandmother," he testified. "She told me these pieces were for Courtney. That's why her name is on the documents." A family friend followed, sharing a memory from a conversation over tea. "She was so proud of how responsible Courtney was," the friend recalled. "She said the jewelry would go to her because she'd treat it with care and understand its meaning." Each statement was another nail in the coffin of her sister's falsehoods. Even the most skeptical relatives were now leaning forward, eyes wide, absorbing the weight of the evidence. Her sister's complexion had drained to a ghostly pale. The room she once commanded now felt like a courtroom, and she was firmly on the witness stand. Under the weight of testimony and documentation, her sister's story crumbled like dry sand. She tried to laugh it off, then deflect, then claim misunderstanding, but every excuse collided with hard proof. "You said Grandma promised it all to you verbally," one uncle pointed out. "But these letters say otherwise." "And you claimed there were no documents," another added. "Yet here we are." Her voice wavered. Maybe Grandma was confused. Maybe she forgot she told me. But even she didn't believe her own words. The room that once believed her now regarded her with suspicion and disappointment. Her carefully constructed illusion of being Grandma's chosen one had dissolved under the relentless force of truth. The lawyer, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "I need to make this very clear," he said, his tone cutting through the tension. Knowingly misrepresenting a deceased person's wishes, especially when legal documents exist to the contrary, can constitute fraud. If we pursued this in court, there could be serious civil, even criminal, consequences. Her sister's eyes widened. Criminal? Forgery, suppression of evidence, or fraudulent possession of assets, the lawyer continued. Each carries legal weight, and based on what we've seen today, a strong case could be made. The color drained further from her face. What had once seemed like an easy grab for family treasures was now a potential legal disaster. The room was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, a countdown to the inevitable reckoning. The pressure was unbearable. Every eye in the room bore down on her sister, every fact lined up neatly against her. And then, in a desperate attempt to defend herself, she made a catastrophic mistake. "Fine," she snapped, voice cracking. "I knew about the appraisal, but Grandma told me it didn't matter anymore." The room froze. The admission hung heavy in the air, undeniable and irreversible. She had just confessed to knowing the truth and deliberately hiding it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The executor's expression hardened. The lawyer leaned back, satisfied. Courtney remained silent, her heart pounding, the final puzzle piece sliding into place. Her sister's lies weren't just exposed, they were self-incriminated. And now, with her admission echoing through the room, there was no turning back. The reckoning she had tried to avoid was coming, and there was nowhere left to run. The room was silent when the executor finally cleared his throat and spoke. After reviewing the evidence, including the appraisal, correspondence, and witness statements, he announced, "It's clear that your grandmother's intent was for this jewelry to belong to Courtney. Legally and ethically, there is no ambiguity." A collective sigh rippled through the room, though not everyone's was one of relief. Courtney sat still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart racing. It was over. Weeks of doubt, humiliation, and gaslighting had led to this moment. A public, undeniable declaration that the truth had always been on her side. Her sister didn't speak. She simply stared at the table, lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. The executor continued. "Effective immediately, all pieces will be returned. Any refusal to comply will result in legal action." It was more than a victory. It was validation. The proof that love, promises, and memory could not be erased by lies. If her sister thought the ordeal would fade quietly, she was wrong. In the days that followed, whispers turned into storms. Relatives who had once believed her stories now avoided her. Invitations vanished. Conversations went cold. Worse still, the lawyer had filed a formal notice of potential legal scrutiny. "Even if charges aren't pursued," he explained to Courtney, "there's a record now of deceit, of withholding property. It will follow her." At family gatherings, eyes that once looked at her with admiration now burned with disappointment. Some openly criticized her betrayal, others simply kept their distance. And through it all, Courtney didn't revel in her sister's fall. She felt no joy in seeing someone she once loved unravel. But there was a certain justice, not in revenge, but in the unshakable reality that actions have consequences. Days later, her sister showed up unannounced. She looked smaller somehow, not in stature, but in spirit. "Are you happy now?" she asked bitterly. "No," Courtney replied softly. "I'm heartbroken." The words seemed to sting more than anger ever could. "You lied to me," she continued. "You lied to everyone." "And for what? A few pieces of jewelry? They were more than that. They were Grandma's love, her trust. And you tried to erase me from that." Tears welled in her sister's eyes, but Courtney didn't soften. "I would have shared them with you," she said, "if you'd just been honest. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was closure. The truth laid bare between them, free of pretense. Whether her sister ever apologized didn't matter anymore. Courtney had spoken her truth, and that was enough." In the weeks that followed, Courtney found herself surrounded by support she hadn't expected. Aunts, cousins, and even distant relatives reached out to praise her courage. "You handled this with grace," one aunt told her. "I would have lost my temper months ago," another cousin admitted. "I believed her at first. I'm sorry. I should have trusted you." It was strange, almost overwhelming, to be at the center of so much warmth after so much coldness. But more than anything, it reaffirmed a lesson Grandma had always taught her. Integrity speaks louder than words. The jewelry was returned in full, each piece polished and carefully wrapped, but it wasn't the gold or gems that mattered most. It was the respect, the dignity, and the rightful place in her grandmother's legacy that she had fought to reclaim. Word of what happened spread far beyond the immediate family. Distant relatives in other cities called to ask if the rumors were true. Old friends of Grandma's sent letters praising Courtney for honoring her memory. The story changed how everyone viewed both sisters. Where once her sister had been seen as charming and favored, now many saw manipulation and greed. And where Courtney had been dismissed as too emotional or too passive, they now saw strength, quiet, determined, and unyielding. It wasn't a reputation she'd sought, but it was one she'd earned. And perhaps somewhere, Grandma was smiling, proud of the granddaughter who hadn't let love be rewritten by lies. Months later, as Courtney prepared for a major work event, a promotion celebration that felt like the beginning of a new chapter, she opened the velvet box that held Grandma's jewelry. Inside, nestled among soft fabric, was the necklace she had always loved most, a delicate chain with a single sapphire pendant. Her hands trembled as she clasped it around her neck. The cool weight against her skin felt like more than just metal and stone. It was love. It was legacy. It was a promise kept. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she whispered, "I hope I made you proud." For the first time in months, there were no tears, only a calm, steady joy that pulsed through her like sunlight. Standing before the mirror that evening, Courtney stared at her reflection. The sapphire glimmered softly against her collarbone, and in that quiet glow she saw more than jewelry. She saw proof. Proof that patience could outlast deception. That evidence could silence arrogance. That truth, no matter how deeply buried, always found its way to the surface. She smiled. Not a triumphant smile, but one of peace. The fight was over. Justice had been served. And the bond she'd shared with Grandma had emerged untarnished, shining brighter than ever. Outside, a new chapter waited. One built not on betrayal, but on strength, dignity, and truth. And as she stepped forward, the weight of the necklace was no longer heavy. It was a crown, a testament to everything she had endured and overcome. And with every step she took, Courtney carried that legacy proudly into the future.